What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Week 9 quarterback start sits. So talking about every single starting quarterback this week, listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. The starts are going to be the quarterbacks you feel very confident throwing into your lineup. So typically your mid-tier QB1s to your high-end QB1s. The fringe options, these are going to be like your back-end QB1s, high-end QB2s, and then the sits, quarterbacks you'd prefer to keep on your bench. I feel like coming into the season, there was so much depth at the quarterback position where you could have kind of punted the position, and at the time, you could have drafted some really quality late round guys like your Geno Smiths, your Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, players like that. At this point in the season, it feels like the quarterback position has taken a massive hit, both due to injuries and then also just some of those later round guys not really, playing up to what we kind of expected. So we're going to dive into the Thursday night game first, and we're going to have the Titans taking on the Steelers. And I'd say normally, right, if the quarterback position was thriving, no bye weeks, I probably wouldn't love the idea of plugging Will Levis into my lineup, even after a really impressive debut. But I'm going to have him here as a fringe option with some quality quarterbacks on bye, plus the injuries to guys like Kirk Cousins, potentially Matthew Stafford. We've got other guys like Rodgers, Anthony Richardson out for the season. I think Will Levis is a fine fringe option as like a fringe QB1 this week. Who knows if he's able to replicate what we saw last week, but I think it was a great sign that he went out, balled out in his first start. So Will Levis is going to be a fringe option for me. Then for the Steelers, going to be sitting Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. We saw Kenny Pickett leave the Week 8 game, so whoever's the starter there, definitely going to be a sit for me. Then shifting over to the Sunday games, we have the Dolphins taking on the Chiefs. I feel like both of these quarterbacks are very solid starts at this point. This game could be a shootout here, so you fire up Tua and you fire up Patrick Mahomes. Even though Mahomes is coming off a down game, like what are you going to do? Assuming you're in a normal size league, you're just not going to have a better quarterback option than Mahomes sitting on your bench. Then looking at the Vikings Falcons matchup, big fall off from the previous game. It looks like even though the Vikings traded for Dobbs, that they're going to be starting Hall this week. Even if they go with Dobbs, both these guys are going to be sits for me, especially with Justin Jefferson out. Tough to get super excited about either of those guys. And then for the Falcons, I really hope Taylor Heineke gets to start just for the weapons he could support. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, guys like that. But in terms of actually wanting to start him in my lineup, I would still be sitting them, so whether it's Ritter or Heineke, going to be sitting both of those guys. Then looking at the Seahawks taking on the Ravens, Geno's kind of one of those later round guys who I thought would be a nice pick. Really hasn't panned out. The Ravens have allowed the fewest points per game to the quarterback position, so really tough to have Geno Smith as anything other than a sit at this point. Then for the Ravens, you fire up Lamar Jackson as one of the top 4 or 5 fantasy quarterbacks in the NFL. Then looking at the Cardinals taking on the Browns, I have Kyler Murray as a fringe option, and in a normal week, I'd prefer to kind of wait and see what we get out of Kyler in his first week, but with the injuries, the bye weeks, if they do end up playing Kyler, I think he is playable as like a fringe option, fringe QB1. Now, I don't know if they're actually going to go with him. It's kind of a weird thing because they said that they'd roll with Dobbs again, Kyler Murray wouldn't be ready, and then they came out, said that they looked at the film, Dobbs was not going to start, so it was either going to be Tune or Kyler, so I guess they kind of went back on Kyler not playing. Who knows? If Kyler's suiting up, I think he's a fine fringe option, high-end QB2, fringe QB1. If it's not Kyler and they go with Clayton Tune, definitely going to be sitting him. Then for the Browns, I wouldn't expect Watson to play in this game. If he did play, he would be a fringe option for me. If he doesn't and they roll with PJ Walker is going to be a sit. Moving over to the Rams-Packers matchup. For the Rams here, Matthew Stafford dealing with a thumb injury. He's day-to-day at this point, so it is possible he ends up suiting up for this one. I do have him as a sit option. He hasn't been a great fantasy option. Now you factor in the thumb injury, and the Packers haven't been an easy defense to go up against for opposing quarterbacks. So both Stafford and Rippon are going to be sits if Rippon does end up getting the start. Then for the Packers, Jordan Love's fantasy production has cooled off a little bit, but he's still been fine as like a fringe QB1. So even though he may not be playing at the highest level, I still think he's a fringe play. Also just was not getting any help from his pass catchers last week. Had a ton of potential catchable passes that were not brought in. So hopefully that kind of positively regresses moving forward. Shifting over to the Buccaneers Texans matchup, I think both of these quarterbacks are fringe options. Baker Mayfield's kind of like the definition of a fringe play. He's the guy you look to pick up if your quarterback goes down or is on bye. CJ Stroud, not a great game off the bye, but he's shown he's plenty talented. He's had better performances. I think you're fine to fire him up this week as like a fringe play. Then looking at the Commanders-Patriots matchup, for the Commanders, Sam Howell is someone who I've pretty consistently listed as a fringe option. I feel like at this point, with the injuries, with the bye weeks, he deserves a start designation here. I believe he's the quarterback 10 in points per game, and that includes guys like Will Levis ahead of him in the one-game sample size, Kirk Cousins and Anthony Richardson, who are both now out for the season. So if we remove those players, he's like the quarterback 7 in points per game at this point. The Patriots haven't been an overly tough matchup for quarterbacks, plus the Commanders traded some key defensive pieces yesterday, so potentially, they're going to have to put up more points. Maybe that doesn't really factor in here against the Patriots because their offense is rough, but I think long-term it's also probably a plus if they're going to have to compete with teams, running up the scoreboard on them. So Howell's going to be a start for me. Then for the Patriots, even with the moves the Commanders made on defense, still don't think we can trust Mac Jones. The weapons are just not there. His wide receiver 1, Kendrick Bourne, now out for the season with a torn ACL. Not a great quarterback matchup in this next one. Bears take it on the Saints. Tyson Bagent, going to be a sit for me. He's done, I guess, a fine job kind of supporting these Bears weapons a little bit, but definitely not someone I want to play for fantasy. Then for the Saints, I consider Derek Carr as like a fringe option due to the matchup and just the scarcity at the quarterback position at this point, but I just don't think he's produced at a level where I actually want to put him there. There are other fringe options I think you could go out and plug into your lineup this week. Another tough quarterback matchup with the Colts taking on the Panthers. For the Colts, Gardner Minshew just not producing at a high enough level for fantasy. Also, the Panthers have been pretty tough for opposing quarterbacks. And then for the Panthers, Bryce Young has kind of picked up his play, but I'm definitely not in a spot where I want to fire him up into my lineup. Still not a ton of help around him on his offense. And then we're just going to keep the bad quarterback matchups rolling here with the Giants taking on the Raiders. Seems like Daniel Jones may be able to play this week. If he does suit up, he's still going to be a sit for me. And then there's no shot I could have Jimmy G as anything other than a sit after what we saw in Monday Night Football. So he is definitely going to be a sit for me. Then looking at the Cowboys Eagles matchup, I think both of these quarterbacks are really solid starts this week. The Eagles have actually given up the third most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Dak's coming off a big day. I think you fire up Dak with a lot of confidence. And then every single week, you're going to fire up Jalen Hurts with confidence. Even in a tough matchup here against the Cowboys, he's going to be locked into your fantasy lineups. Another game with some great quarterback options. We have Sunday Night Football, Bills taking on the Bengals. Josh Allen is a locked-in weekly start. Joe Burrow, we all know he's had a very rough start to the season, but he had the bye week. He came back, just lit up the 49ers, looked fantastic, looked like he was totally healthy. I think you can play him as like a mid-tier QB1 this week and feel pretty good about him in your lineup. And then the final game of the week, Chargers taking on the Jets. Even though Justin Herbert draws a tough matchup here against the Jets, I think he's in that tier of quarterback where you pretty much fire him up regardless of matchup. So Herbert's going to be a start, and then Zach Wilson's going to be a sit. I think both those guys, pretty consensus at this point. And that's going to wrap it up for all of the Week 9 QB matchups. Hopefully this helped you guys set your lineup or potentially, look to pick someone up off of waivers. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. My running back, wide receiver, and tight end videos should all be up at this point, or maybe the tight ends not yet, but they will be soon. So thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.